What's up, brothers in Christ, gentlemen of taste, all those good things. Today we will be talking about Nintendo 64 versus PlayStation 1. It is an era that I know fondly and look back on fondly, and I have a little bit of regret, actually a lot of regret. You see, I didn't have a PlayStation. I was a Nintendo fanboy at the time. I had just come off the high of Nintendo Entertainment System, the Super Entertainment System, and of course Nintendo was going to hit another home run, right? Well, that's what I expected. I expected to buy a Nintendo 64. I read all the magazines. I was so hyped, and when I finally got my Nintendo 64, I had 2 games. That is correct, 2 games. The Nintendo 64 launched in the United States with 2 games. September 29th, 1996, I got my Nintendo 64. I was freaking over the moon. I was just like that kid. And I had the opportunity to buy 2 games. I had enough money. I had saved my money from mowing lawns. I bought Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wings 64. Both are amazing games, and I put hundreds of hours into both of them. The problem was, it was just 2 games. So when you play a game for an hour or so and you feel like, hey, I'm getting a little bored of this, I want to play a different game. So then you pop in Pilot Wings. And I distinctly remember, after I was bored of Super Mario 64 for playing for an hour or so, popping in Pilot Wings and thinking, oh no, is this it? It's a crushing feeling when you feel like you've bought the wrong system. And this is a feeling that would carry on in the rest of my life. I had this problem over and over and over again, always picking the underdog because of my feelings, not looking at the facts, not looking at the figures, not looking at the statistics of what would be coming on other consoles. But that sting, that tiny little sting, I felt that the first day I owned my Nintendo 64, because I was on Pilot Wings. And Pilot Wings is a good game, but when that is your fallback, it feels a little weak, you know what I mean? And maybe I'm the only person that feels this way, but I don't believe that. I think at some point, everybody gets bored of their new shiny toy, and they're like, oh man, this is what I spent all this time pining for. And that's what I felt. That problem was exacerbated because all of my friends had a PS1, and they had been enjoying their PS1 for a lot longer than I had my Nintendo 64. So they had their console a whole year longer than I had, and they had a whole year more games to play, with massive titles on the horizon. So arguably, at that point in time, the PlayStation 1 was a better buy than the Nintendo 64. And overall, now that we have hindsight of being, 30 years later, because of the passage of time, we see that the PlayStation 1 was indeed a better console to buy because of the massive catalog of games. I believe there's only 300 or so North American releases on the Nintendo 64, and the PlayStation 1 had about 4,000 unique ones and a total release almost of 8,000 games over its entire lifespan. So, yeah, the PlayStation was a better bang for the buck. Now, my main reason for getting the N64 and waiting for it was because the graphics were going to be so much better. It was 64-bit versus the PlayStation 1's 32-bit. And for the time period, the PlayStation 1 titles looked a little weird, a little janky, texture pop-in, polygons jittering all over the place. But that would come to be nostalgic look, a vibe. People even make games just to look like PlayStation 1. And at the time, we all thought, it was just less powerful and an inferior console. At least the Nintendo 64 fans were thinking that. But all the PlayStation fans that actually owned a PlayStation knew that, well, no, this console was actually very good. It had a large catalog of games, and the developers were able to produce more games because it was cheaper to produce for, because cartridges are more expensive than CDs. So even with the limitations of the PlayStation 1, it was still overall a better experience because more developers were putting their time into that console versus the N64, which had less. That being said, we had amazing games over the history of the Nintendo 64, but they were just drip drop, we were drip fed over the course of the console's life, with the exception being the difference between Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. Those hit back to back very closely, but it took a long time to get there. And what I can say over the course of owning a Nintendo 64, it was a very sad existence because I had only a handful of games. They were very expensive. My parents basically used my Nintendo 64 as a babysitter. It was something that they would throw me down in the basement, turn on the TV and say, here you go. I'm not bashing my parents. It's just not the way I would parent my children. So we don't do that. We don't allow our kids to play games as much as I did back in the day. But the video games were my babysitter back then. And it kind of was needed. I was a hyper kid. I had hyperactivity and I needed something to focus on. And it did help quite a bit. I was able to channel my energies into puzzles and games. That being said, it also probably stunted my emotional and developmental growth because I was playing these games so much. That's probably why I'm so weird these days. Anyway, that being said, when the Nintendo 64 is released and you get just a few decent titles every couple of years, and you look over at your buddies that have PlayStation 1s, and they just have piles and piles and piles of games, it's a little sad. I remember going to my friend's house and playing PlayStation 1, and at the time I was very much a fanboy of Nintendo, and I begrudgingly played the PlayStation 1. But I started to feel that I made the wrong choice. I started to feel that the Nintendo 64 was not the console I thought it was. I thought it was going to have a massive catalog of games like the Super Nintendo did. I thought it was going to be banger after banger, and I was not even going to have enough money to pay for all the games that were coming out, but it was the exact opposite. I actually was saving money from all the yards I was cutting and landscaping I was doing as a kid, and I was not purchasing games because they were not that good. I would go to Blockbuster and rent games, test them out, see what I thought, because you had to be very picky and choosy about what you did back then. I mean, the games were $50, $60. That's a massive amount of money in today's money. Let's just do the math here. So $60 in 1996 was the equivalent of $128. That's a lot of money for a kid to produce on their own. So I had money saved up from doing all these chores and yard work and everything like that, but I wasn't buying games, and I was watching my friends play PlayStation 1. I was very tempted to buy a PlayStation 1, but my parents would not let me do that. I'm kind of not understanding that looking back at this, but they were the type where they just said, like, you have your toy, that's the one toy you get. Even if it was my own money, they just didn't want me to have more than one toy at a time. So, I was unable to get a PlayStation 1. I was stuck with the Nintendo 64. And things got better over time. You know, we started getting Super Smash Brothers. We got, like I said before, Ocarina of Time. We got Majora's Mask. There was a lot of good games sprinkled in over the history of the Nintendo 64. But they were nothing compared to the massive catalog of the PlayStation 1. I vividly remember being so jealous because my friends had a copy of a Resident Evil instruction manual, probably like Brady's or Prima or whatever was popular at the time, and they were flipping through the pages on recess. It was an indoor recess that day, and they were talking about their strategies of how to get through a tough section of the game. And I came over and I was looking at the book, and I'm like, wow, I felt like, you know, this console, this game has a lot of depth to it. And I don't really remember having that same level of depth in the games I was playing on Nintendo 64. The water temple from Ocarina is about the only thing I remember that was that challenging, that you had to think about it or talk strategy with friends. And I only had a few friends that even had Nintendo 64. Anybody had a PlayStation 1. So we were kind of the babies, you know. We had the baby console. We were the outcasts compared to the PlayStation 1 friends. So I just kind of looked over their shoulder, and man, I was like, you guys are having so much more fun than I am. I really wish I would have had a PS1. And that was just one little game. My other friend got a copy of Final Fantasy VII, and he was talking about the deep story and the characters. And I'm like, well, we don't have any RPGs like that. Oh, you know what? Come to think of it, we don't have any RPGs like that. There's like none on the console. It's it's completely barren. And then it dawned on me, Square didn't produce any Final Fantasies. We didn't have any Secret of Mana. We didn't have any decent games besides like Quest 64. So I was like, well, you know what? That's another reason why the N64 sucks. And then I was playing Cruisin' USA. That was my main racing game. And my other buddy had Gran Turismo. Wait a minute. You have a simulator on your console? And I went over and played it. Jeez Louise. Gran Turismo blows anything I have out of the water. We had like Revolt, the RC car game. We had Cruisin' USA series. We had Rush. But Rush is like an arcade game. And so is Cruisin'. They're arcade titles ported to the Nintendo 64. So the experiences are not as good as the arcade experience, but also they're not a simulator. So you don't have that nitty-gritty details type of stuff. You can't buy real-world cars and be a car guy. And I was like, wow, okay, that's another thing. That's another thing that absolutely makes me wish I would have bought a PlayStation 1. And then you had like the mainline titles. You Crash Bandicoot, very fun game. Stuff like Spyro the Dragon, you know, that very, very reasonable competitor to Mario 64. Overall, the bangers were just nonstop on PlayStation 1. The only things I feel that were very important and kind of sold the console were the Banjo-Kazooie series, Mario and Zelda. Those types of things were basically deal breakers. If you wanted to play them, you had to have one, but there was nothing really comparable on the PlayStation like that. But there were so many things that weren't comparable, vice versa. I just remember feeling like a total loser because I had bought the farm on this idea that the N64 was going to be just the top dog. And it was, at the time, very powerful. And it made very nice graphics. It was a powerhouse. But the problem was that the technology was too hard to use. And Nintendo suffered for it. So it was a very clear delineation in my life where I had messed up. But the problem is I'm not very smart and I don't learn from my mistakes, and we'll talk about that in a future video. But this video is wrapping up the concept of what it felt like to be on the outside of the PlayStation ecosystem and be in the Nintendo ecosystem. It felt like you were drip fed versus a flood of games on the PlayStation 1. I mean, it felt like PlayStation guys were the future. PlayStation guys were cool and hip and modern, and Nintendo guys were baby toy. We were archaic. We were of the plastic box with the weird controller that just looked dumb. The PlayStation could play CDs. It could play CDs that moms and dads wouldn't like you to listen to. It felt edgy. It felt new. It felt modern. And I remember being so jealous. And that's just something that I've noticed about as time has progressed. The younger generation, the Gen Zs, have started to adopt these old consoles, and they can see them through the lens of a non-biased perspective because they didn't grow up with them. But from my perspective, from my generation's perspective, we grew up with these things. We saw them as they progressed. And I always feel my go-to console of that generation was the PlayStation 1, and I really wish I would have got it. I did eventually get a PlayStation, and it was amazing. I got it when it was on discount, and I was able to enjoy lots of titles at a discounted price, because in that era, things did not increase in price. They went down, except for the super rare titles, the Suikoden's and those kind of things. Those have always kind of been at a high plateau. But the cheap games, those were easy to obtain back in the day. And they are to this day for the most part. PlayStation 1 collecting is kind of less prominent. So I hate to say this because then people will start, going out and buying PlayStation 1 stuff. But it's kind of like the forgotten generation, the forgotten console. Nobody likes the PlayStation 1. They like the PlayStation 2 because it can do both. But I like the experience of using a PlayStation 1, even for all of its faults. It's still more nostalgic for me. Opening up that disc tray and plopping in a disc is just kind of second to none. That feeling is very awesome to me. So So I would say, to my own detriment, trying to find PlayStation 1 titles and collecting for it is fairly reasonable right now. So maybe give it a try if you're interested. This has just been kind of a look back on my childhood and the things I experienced, for better or for worse. I would say PlayStation 1 absolutely dominated the generation, and I haven't even talked about the Sega Saturn. I had one friend with a Sega Saturn, and it broke so early on in its life that it just kind of sat on the shelf, and I don't know why they never got it repaired, because this was back in the day where you could actually send your consoles out to be repaired to the manufacturer, but it never got repaired. It just collected dust. We played it a few times. We played Panzer Dragoon and a few other things like that. It felt good, but it just had that quirky Sega vibe to it. Like, it was fragile. It felt non-robust. It felt like it was a gimmick, and to some extent the console lifespan kind of mirrored what the Nintendo 64 did. But yeah, we did not like the Sega Saturn growing up. Hopefully this sparks a little bit of debate. Like I said, the Gen Zs can look at this generation as a clear head, and people like me have the hindsight, and people like me are old people that grew up with it, and we just have our stigmas stuck in our head about what these consoles were. But to some extent, it's why I think millennials are much more harsh on game consoles and game companies than Gen Zs, because Gen Zs are just like, hey, everything is everything. Everything is a shade of gray, whereas my generation's more of binaries. Everything's black and white. We grew up with it, so we know that it's not what it seems to be. Our perception gets warped by the passage of time, whereas theirs is basically like a blank slate. And I understand why they feel this way. It's just when you lived it, you have a perspective that they don't have, and we are also on the same timeline that they are on. So we can see things with a blank slate as well, and use that to our advantage to kind of look back into our history, look back into our past, and analyze what our memories are, whereas they have no memories of these things, if that makes any sense. Anyway, take care. See you in the next one.